All right, great interview for you guys today. Dan Weeks, he's the executive director of New Hampshire Rebellion. New Hampshire is sorely in need for a rebellion, and we've got the election primary coming up there in about a week, so perfect time to check back in with him. Dan, how are you, brother?
Doing well. Thank you for having me. It's cold, but it's busy here in New Hampshire with all the candidates back in state.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, first, before we get to the update on it, remind the good folks at home what New Hampshire Rebellion is about.
So, 2 years ago at this time, we launched the first long march across New Hampshire, starting way up north near the Canadian border, all the way down to across New Hampshire to the southern tip. A year ago at this time, we were marching from all four corners of the state, headed to Concord to mark the 5th anniversary of the Citizens United decision. And the point of all these marches, which now add up to 30,000 miles, is to stage a rebellion, a grassroots citizens' rebellion against big money politics. For 6 years now, since the Supreme Court handed down its Citizens United decision, we have seen billionaires, both sides of the aisle, flood our elections with unlimited contributions to elect or defeat candidates. And it is crippling our democracy. Citizens around the country, and certainly here in New Hampshire, are disgusted with the way politics is done today. And we think the time has come for a grassroots rebellion against big money. So we are entering the final week of the New Hampshire primary, and our demand to all the presidential candidates is the same as it's been all along, that they commit to making real campaign finance reform that can get the big money out of politics their number one priority once in office.
So I know that you guys wanted to talk to all the candidates who had to come through New Hampshire because New Hampshire's primary is so important early on in the process and get them on the record on this. So how did it go? How many of the candidates were you guys able to talk to so far, and what has their responses been?
Well, since we launched this rebellion, we have talked to every one of the candidates dozens of times. We've had hundreds of encounters by now with ordinary citizens pounding the pavement, going to campaign events. There are over 500 grassroots volunteers who've been trained and sent out to events. And we have actually seen, and this was a little bit of a surprise to me because a lot of candidates will answer your question but not go much beyond that. We have actually seen the candidates take some decent positions on getting big money out of politics. All three Democrats, I guess we now have just two Democrats left, have actually issued solid plans that would overturn the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, that would get small donor citizen-funded elections, that would deal with the gerrymandering, deal with bribes from lobbyists, etc. So the Democrats have gone pretty much as far as we could ask in terms of policies they support, and the real test will be whether they will implement those policies once in office. And the Republicans have supported at least a few of the reforms, things like gerrymandering reform, overturning Citizens United, small donor, public funding. We've seen pretty substantial support from several Republicans. We're not all the way there, but they have actually started to move based on all these questions and all these marches that we've done.
So I know that Lindsey Graham said some surprising things that were in favor of campaign finance reform. But have you guys been able to talk to the top three finishers in Iowa, Trump, Cruz, and Rubio? Now, Trump has actually gotten ahead partly by talking about how corrupt the system is, but I've never heard him offer an alternative or even say that he was going to change it. So any progress on those three?
We have been in front of all three. And from Trump, he's probably gone the furthest. You've heard him talk about the problem. He has gone beyond simply talking about the problem to say that he supports overturning, at least banning super PACs. He hasn't been specific about whether he would support an Article 5 convention or a constitutional amendment, but he has said that we should ban these super PACs, and he considers it an article of pride that he hasn't taken any super PAC money. Of course, he doesn't need it as a billionaire. The other two Republicans, Cruz has been tough. Cruz argues a pretty radical First Amendment line saying that any limits on speech, on spending in campaigns amount to limits in political speech. We respectfully counter that. That is tantamount to defending the rights of billionaires against the right of any other American to speak and be heard, and we've had some heated exchanges with him to that end. And then Rubio has acknowledged that there's a problem. He said we need better transparency, but we'd like to see more. The truth is that all three of these guys, well, with the exception of Trump because he's got his billions, have relied on enormous support from super PACs, and they don't want to change that system.
Yeah, Cruz is in favor of the super PACs because he has them. He has a lot of them. He had $36 million given to him by just 4 people. 2 of them are brothers, and the other 2 are separate interests. And they're business people, and they want something in return. 3 out of the 4 are in the energy business, and they want something in return for that. They all want tax cuts. So Cruz is bathed in the corruption. Of course he doesn't want to change the corruption. The corruption is what got Cruz to the position that he's in now. Rubio with a lip service to transparency. 1, he's not actually going to do anything about that. 2, the Republicans are actually against the Disclose Act, which would bring us transparency. And 3, that's a way of avoiding the issue altogether so you don't actually have to do anything real about it. The real wild card is Trump, right? Because he is not wedded to this system. In my political opinion, he's a maniac otherwise. But if you were able to get him on tape, at least saying super PACs should be banned, and I don't know the exact language that he used, that could be really interesting if, God forbid, he were to become president. So where do you guys have the video of all their reactions to this, and can we use it if he actually becomes president, or even the nominee?
We hope you will use it. The New Hampshire Rebellion has been keeping a tracking website called questioner.us. That's question with an R.us. And we have now dozens of videos from candidates that we've taken on the campaign trail. I think you make an important point about Trump. He has said that he wants super PACs banned. He has also said that he likes the idea of citizen-funded elections, so moving to some form of public funding. He hasn't been real specific. We're trying to work with his campaign on getting some specifics. To give it a slightly more positive spin, I wish I could disagree with you on Cruz and Rubio, but the fact that we now have multiple other national Republicans, granted guys who probably aren't going to get the nomination, but still respected Republicans. Lindsey Graham, you mentioned. John Kasich is another who's running very strong here in New Hampshire. Jim Gilmore, the former governor of Virginia, has
you guys found him. Man, you really are vigilant. You even talked to Gilmore.
We're going after all of them, and we'll have a few of them at least at our We the People convention this weekend. But Gilmore and Kasich have said that they support some form of small donor public funding of campaigns. Gilmore has said he supports an outright constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. This is not the end of the road by any means, but at least as you and others have been fighting to make this the cross-partisan issue that it really is for ordinary people, we are seeing some leaders in the Republican Party start to get on board.
All right, that's great. I want to come back to the Democrats in a second because I want to know what their actual plans are. But I know you guys are doing a convention called We the People. It's taking place in Veterans Park in Manchester, New Hampshire, February 5th to 7th. What does it mean that it's February 5th to 7th? Are we hanging out like Woodstock for a couple of days? And who's coming to this thing?
So this is primary weekend, 3 days before the New Hampshire First in the Nation presidential primary. We have, because we're the New Hampshire Rebellion, we don't like to do the traditional thing. We're actually erecting a massive tent, a 500 capacity tent. Unlike our usual walks, there will actually be some heat. We've got the diesel fuel standing by. And we have people coming from around the country. 10 national reform groups are sending folks from all over and from D.C. to participate and to speak at the convention. National reform champions like Lawrence Lessig will be there. Marianne Williamson, who you know out in L.A., is flying cross-country to be there. And we expect several presidential candidates to also be there to give us their commitments, what they will do to end this corruption. We've decided, instead of wandering around the woods of New Hampshire, we've decided to go to really where the action is, at political ground zero. All the national media will be camped out across the street at the main convention center, and we will compel them to come out to the tent and address this Citizens We the People convention.
So other people you've got are Ben Cohen of Ben and Jerry's. You've got Sam Waterston, who's a famous actor, producer, director. Zephyr Teachout, and people who really care about this issue like Derek Cressman. But the guy I wanted to ask you about is Take Back Our Republic founder John Pudner, who's a GOP strategist who helped unseat Eric Cantor, the former House Majority Leader. Now, they ran a really interesting campaign in a Republican primary against Eric Cantor. So what's his take on all this money in politics?
John Pudner and the group Take Back Our Republic, I think, is one of the most exciting developments in this field in the last year or two. Take Back Our Republic is made up strictly of conservatives, folks that you may or may not agree with on most issues, but they have decided in the Eric Cantor race, this is the guy who was the campaign manager for Congressman David Brat, who unseated one of the most powerful Republicans in the country, Eric Cantor, a guy who had played the game in Washington awfully well, had become a multimillionaire through his terms in Congress, kind of the epitome of crony capitalism. And this guy, John Pudner, realized after that race that there was a conservative movement to be harnessed for campaign finance reform. And his group, Take Back Our Republic, has taken some very strong positions, has reached out to a lot of the Republican candidates with us, as well as lawmakers in Congress, introducing bills and beginning a Republican Reform Caucus in Congress. It's something that we haven't seen in a very long time, but they're finally getting in the game. And New Hampshire Rebellion has been cross-partisan from the start, and we think there is actually some real potential to bridge that divide and finally form the kind of political consensus that it will take to get these reforms through.
So those Republicans are real patriots. The reason I say that is over 80% of Republicans say that money is corrupting politics. So an overwhelming percentage of their base agrees with an overwhelming percentage of the Democratic base that money corrupts politics. But almost no Republican politician goes down that road. Why? Because they've already been corrupted. And to be fair, a lot of the Democrats don't go down that road either.
Right.
And so for Republicans to take on their establishment and say, no, you guys don't represent real Republican voters, we do. And we're sick of the corruption too. That takes courage, and it's wonderful to see. So now, finally, I wanted to get back to the Democratic candidates, the two that remain. Is there a difference in Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders' position on this corruption, specifically in their proposals to combat it?
You know, you might be surprised to hear that they have actually both taken really comprehensive proposals that are largely the same. So both of them want to overturn Citizens United, support new Supreme Court justices that would overturn that, as well as constitutional amendments. Both of them critically support a system of small donor public funding of campaigns, which is probably the single most important reform that we can pass. And they support a range of other smaller reforms, fixing the Federal Election Commission, improving transparency through something like the Disclose Act, forcing government contractors to disclose their spending as soon as possible. And I think that's a significant measure of the urgency of this issue, that Hillary, who has long ties to Wall Street, has not been out front on this issue in the past, has decided to make it a key pillar. She calls it one of the 4 pillars of her campaign. And I think that's probably a testament also to the grassroots and the Bernie Sanders supporters and Senator Sanders himself, who has made this the centerpiece of his entire campaign.
And Lawrence Lessig, who was briefly in the race, and I remember Hillary Clinton announced her position, which is a very good position, on the day that Larry Lessig entered the race. Pretty sure in politics there aren't a lot of coincidences, and that probably wasn't one either. And exactly Lessig, right. Huge part of the New Hampshire Rebellion, walked over and over in that process, got me to walk in it one of these years. And
indeed.
Yeah, and so all of this, and all the guys, the 500 people that were out there asking the candidates these questions, that's how you make a difference. That's how you take a candidate like Hillary Clinton, who is not necessarily predisposed to be in that direction, and move her in that direction. So that's people power, and it's great to see. One last question on that, Dan. Did they ever clarify their position on Article 5 convention? It's one thing to ask Congress, pretty please, for an amendment, which they're very unlikely to give it you, given how corrupted the system is already. It's another thing to say, no, the states are going to demand an amendment through the convention process. Are they on the record on whether they're pro-convention or not?
I'm afraid to say we have not seen any statements from them on that. I think they're a little bit scared of what that might produce. But we are encouraged by how far they've come. And to the point you just made, this is not because they woke up one morning deciding they wanted to make this a central issue. And I think that's particularly true for the former Secretary of State. It is because citizens have been pounding the pavement in New Hampshire and have been organizing through Wolfpack and many organizations around the country over several years now. And I think it goes to show that it's one thing to have good policy, to have good ideas. We need to make it good politics. And the only way we make this into good politics that candidates will win or lose on is by choosing as citizens to invest ourselves in the cause. And we feel awfully excited to be on the front lines here in New Hampshire for this final week. And we want to pass the baton on, even though we'll be continuing with our work in New Hampshire, but we want to pass it on to other states as the primaries go national to ensure that all over the country, the candidates are hearing from citizens that they have got to fix this problem first, or else we won't be able to solve any of the other big problems that our country faces.
It's true that some in the establishment do worry about what might happen in a convention. Here's what might happen: change.
Indeed.
Right.
And that's a scary thing, but it's a damn necessary thing these days.
Absolutely, because this system needs to be changed. So I love that you guys put the politicians' feet to the fire on that. You've got another week to do that, and then you've got your convention coming up February 5th to 7th. So where can people find out more about that?
Head on over to nhrebellion.org. And we've got a few seats left. The tent is looking very full at this time, but anybody in New England or folks further afield who want to travel north, this will be the place to be, political ground zero this weekend. Again, nhrebellion.org.
All right. If you want to help focus on a group that actually wants the convention and the amendment, as Dan pointed out, Wolfpack is something we support, wolf-pack.com. If you want to help out immediately right now in New Hampshire, nhrebellion.org. Dan Weeks, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.